Um, my name is Sarah, use she, her pronouns. I'm the campaigns coordinator of Chicago DSA, which is the organization hosting this training today. So we've been doing a series of organizer trainings about different aspects of organizing, and this is one on action planning, which is going to hopefully give you an overview of like what goes into planning an action, how you can start planning an action. If you would, please sign in to this event, and then you'll get a follow-up email after this event that will give you both the PowerPoint and the recording. We're going to be recording, so if you would not want to like have your face on a recording, just like stop your video. So we're going to be recording and sending out the recording of this training to everyone who signs in. So go ahead and do that, and you can review this later and go over the PowerPoint at your own speed later as well. We're going to be having Brian Bennett from the Lift the Ban campaign and Courtney Gray from the Political Education Committee help out with this today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
What's up, everybody? I'm Brian Bennett. I am, part of the Lift the Ban campaign, and I have been participating and helping to organize those actions, as well as a couple CPAC defund actions recently for about the last maybe year or two. I'm certainly not somebody who'd call myself like an expert on planning actions, but I think that's kind of important because there are no experts in this fight, right? And so I think it's valuable to see that, like, you know, it doesn't take that much time and participation in this stuff to start to feel at least arrogant enough to hold a Zoom training on it, right? I'll be handling kind of more of the content side of things, and Courtney's going to be facilitating more of the engagement side of things. So, hey, Courtney, you want to say hi?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I am Courtney. I use she, her pronouns. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm mostly involved with the Political Education Committee. But today I'm going to be helping kind of facilitate ways that we can make sure everybody can like really put themselves in the position of imagining that you are going to plan a direct action because you are capable of it. And that's one of our major outcomes, is thinking that that's something you can desire to do and know the steps to do it. So hopefully we'll be able to discuss a little bit about everyone's individual like possibilities for doing that in the future.
Absolutely. Before we kind of start, we'll look at our rules for feminist process that we hold all our CDSA meetings with. You know, respect the discussion that we're having, respect the facilitators, you know, in this case, me and Courtney, trying to, you know, create structure here, share the air and encourage others. You know, when we do get to a bit of a discussion point of this, you know, step up if you are somebody who's a little nervous and normally doesn't express yourself. We need to hear your voice. And if you're somebody who talks a lot, like me, maybe step back a bit and do that active listening. Consider your position, you know, in all these intersections of oppression that we have in our society. Be mindful of those as much as possible when you're speaking. Make I statements. Instead of, you know, factual generalizations and claims. Try to, you know, speak from your perspective, and assume good faith on everybody's part here, that we are all in the struggle together, even if somebody, you know, you disagree with them or they're way off base, that everyone's coming to this with good faith and assuming the best intentions of each other. So let's look at our core takeaways that we're hoping every participant here kind of walks away with. Number one, you know, the logistical side of things. Understand the general steps to plan a direct action, what kind of support and resources you need to pull it off. Number two, to understand every direct action as a generative organizing process, not a political product, right? We love the outcomes of these direct actions, but I think every meeting leading up to one is just as important as the final event, right? And then lastly, Courtney, why don't you speak to this one, since I think that's really you.
Sure. Yeah, this last core takeaway is for everyone to reflect on your own direct action experience. Regardless of if you have never attended a direct action, right up through like you have personally planned one in its entirety and executed it, and it went great. We think that you'll have the opportunity to set a personal goal to better understand how direct actions are put together and how you can be involved in the future. So really take the opportunity to personalize what we're putting out for you, not just say like, great, I hope someday I'll witness someone planning this, but really insert yourself and figure out how you can enact what you're going to be learning today in the future for whatever campaign you may already be involved with or hope to be involved with going forward.
Yeah, so those are our core takeaways. Going on to that next slide, do you want to speak on this, Courtney, and what you kind of want people to reflect on here?
Yeah, so throughout the presentation today, we're going to kind of structure it as like before, during, and after an action. I would love it if everyone could have in mind, maybe not like a dream as this slide does say, but have in mind a direct action that you specifically could think through some of the logistics for, and really think about an application that is realistic in your experience. So some of the images here kind of speak to the wide variety of what direct action means. There are like really a full range of forms that can take. So some of these are like more like dramatic plays where it's about like creating a visual that's shareable, or this virtual town hall that you can see in the middle. There are lots of like more like mediated versions. And then there's on the other end, more like full scale, get as many people to come and participate and be at a location, or shutting down a road or a car caravan, and kind of think about what sorts of tactics you might imagine using for your own specific campaigns. And then we'll have opportunities throughout to hear from some of you all about like what campaigns you're involved with and what this like dream direct action looks like for you, and how you see the information we're presenting filling out with those specific imaginary actions that you might be building.
Beautiful. So let's get into the advance of the action, that preparation. We want to go on to the next slide. I feel like the first time you ever learn about a direct action or a protest is probably, like, in at least my experience in like in school, is like the Rosa Parks bus one, right? And what they teach you is that Rosa Parks just spontaneously just got so tired of racism that she stood up on that bus and sat in the segregated seat, right? And of course, what we know, what you learn later, is that it was a very deliberate, very organized, very not spontaneous, strategic action, right? So that's the first question, right? We're not just out here to protest because it feels good or anything. We're out here to protest to get political outcomes. So our examples here, right? Do your workers, either in your union or in your non-unionized workforce, have a demand of their boss? Do people want an institution to do something? I'll throw out an example there of, I know that there were some bird dogging, AKA sort of personally following and making miserable Arne Duncan, who was I believe, the education secretary under Obama, to get more funding to public schools in Chicago. So, we're not always right at directly elected politicians. Do people want a law to be passed or not passed? And I'll be using sort of a running case study, a running example during this training of a Lift the Ban action that we did in 2019, and then kind of repeated against a different target in 2020, which was us trying to flip votes within a particular committee in Springfield to move Lift the Ban along, right? And we did two of those actions that were pretty much identical on two different state representatives at their offices, One, we successfully flipped the vote after, the other, we did not. So I'm kind of going to be using those as examples as we go along. And then, of course, do you just want to raise consciousness? Do you just want people thinking about your issue or this particular system of oppression that you're fighting? These are all, kind of classic reasons to hold an action. So let's decide the target, right? You have to do some analysis here of who or what influences your target. Once you've picked your target, who or what influences them. I don't know if some people here went to the power mapping training at our last organizer training, but to give an example here of our action, we had one state legislator named Ann Williams, who was a classic kind of corporate Democrat representing a neighborhood here in Chicago, and sat on the committee that we needed to get the ban bill through. And what we decided was that we needed to dramatize the moral stakes of what she was doing by opposing this bill, right? We needed to cast it as a moral decision, not just some kind of wonky policy decision. And then we also had to just make people notice that it was happening at all, right? Most people don't know about some bill that's in some subcommittee in Springfield. So we wanted to answer the second question, what influenced this representative? In our case, this was, we were hoping to influence her essentially through attention and bad press, right? So the way that we went about this in this case was we decided to dramatize the situation by getting basically an apartment's worth of furniture, which we were able to access at the Chicago Furniture Bank through like a connection that we had there. I don't think they do this normally. We got a U-Haul truck, packed all the furniture in the U-Haul truck, emptied it out onto Belmont Avenue right in front of her office right at rush hour. So there was a ton of traffic and a ton of attention and helicopters and stuff like that. And we held the street for a couple hours. And so that was like us showing the human toll of this, right? But also creating this like neighborhood buzz of like, what the hell's going on with this state representative? So that's my case study here of who or what influenced our target and why we chose them. They were sitting on the subcommittee. Next slide. Escalation is always going to be a contentious point when you're talking to your allies or your DSA comrades about this, right? Have you, a lot of people feel that, by doing a protest against a politician, they won't ever work with you again. And by protesting them, they'll see you kind of as this agitator who's not, rational, and they won't work with you again, right? So it is, sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not true. But the point is, we have to at least take that decision seriously and take our comrades' feelings about, what level of escalation we're at seriously. So in this case, we had at least one, maybe two lobbying meetings with the state legislator where they had said some very dismissive things about like our coalition and what we were fighting for. We had not targeted her at a protest before. And that's an important question, right? Because if you're going to come back to do another protest of a politician, you better escalate it, right? Unless you're doing them so frequently that even just repeated actions of the same type are going to start to kind of build up like plaque in their, stress system. You kind of don't want to come back unless you either have more people or a more dramatic escalation of what those people are doing at this action, right? Have you targeted a pressure point of this person before? This could be their donors, right? This could be constituents of theirs who are sympathetic to your issue but don't know much about it, or don't really, oh, my legislator's okay, maybe she disagrees with you on this. You don't always have to go right for the exact target, right? You want to think strategically about who the target cares about. And then, of course, what has this person said about what we want, right? To justify your action, to justify your escalation, best to just use their words, right? That show, or their donors, or their, law firm that they continue to work for while in office. In this case, we had somebody who had a ton of corporate donations we were able to point to. We were able to, in this case, we targeted a lot of the theme of LGBT homelessness, which is a major issue here in Chicago among LGBT youth. And we had a classic sort of, I believe the term is pink washing. This was a state representative who loves to march in LGBT marches and stuff. So we used photos of her at that and kind of contrasted that with the lack of attention to actual housing for LGBT folks, right? And then on the right side of this slide, creativity is almost everything when it comes to these actions. It's not everything, but it's a huge portion of this. And like a great idea, where do ideas come from? On the right side here, we can see, our history, this tradition of struggle, this tradition of direct action that we can draw on. We all know what a rally looks like, we all know what a march looks like. If you've seen a sit-in or a die-in, that's people just refusing to move until you get some kind of demand. Car caravans, of course, more than ever recently with COVID. Something like a social media storm, spamming a politician's Twitter, doing a phone zap or a Zoom rally. There was a great CPAC action a couple weeks ago where an alderman in the 46th ward, James Kappelman, held a police accountability town hall, and everyone made their Zoom image the same CPAC banner. So every image of this town hall was just covered in propaganda from them. I love that. And of course, bird dogging, which is, more about persistently bringing a small group of people to the politicians' events, whether they're digital or in person. And I bring all these up because we can draw on these traditions, but we also always have to kind of leave that creative space for what makes it pop, what makes it really interesting, what makes it dramatic, what makes people want to be a part of it, right? I think we always, like in the case of this action, the idea was just brought to us by an organizer, and we were like, love it, let's do it, right? But it's important before you do an action to kind of maybe pause and say, like, does somebody need to, go take a long walk and try to think of a new angle on this, a new way to dramatize this. So I think I've made my point clear here. If we want to go on to the next slide. The basics are, who are we planning this action with? Who are our coalition allies? Who are the allies that we haven't reached out to yet? I think that actions are maybe the best place to bring in new coalition allies, right? If you have some ally who, they care about housing, they want rent control in the abstract, but you ask them to come to your meetings, you ask them to come to your phone banks, you ask them to come to, a town hall, they may or may not come, right? And I tend to think that, like, we're doing this exciting action, we need you to be a part of it, we want you to help us plan it, we want your thumbprints all over this, is the best kind of invitation to bring in new coalition allies, right? And then logistics, right? There's so many like Excel spreadsheets out there that anyone who's planning an action can ask me or somebody in DSA for to use as your template. But God damn it, are there like a million different things that have to be thought of before an action? And inevitably, a couple hours before, you will be like, we forgot tape. How are we going to put up the posters without the tape, right? So there are so many little things. And each one of those little things to me is an invitation to organize people, right? Yeah, it's great if people show up to a rally and, grab a sign that you brought. But even better is, even something really small, like you have a new organizer who's come to some meetings, but they seem a little nervous about taking that step forward. What about just asking them to be, the person who's in charge of bringing tape? It's literally crucial for your action, right? It gives somebody this responsibility for the outcome, but it's like kind of a bit of a baby step, right? So that's how I like to think about logistics. Each logistic is potential to organize and not just mobilize. And then I'll also throw in here too, meeting schedules, right? If you're gonna meet weekly before a big action, like we did for that lift the ban action, it's really good to be intentional as organizers about rotating who is chairing those meetings if possible, right? Maybe rotating who's setting up the Zoom calls, rotating who's setting up the agenda. This is how we avoid everything becoming a choke point at one crucial organizer who, who knows, like they have a baby that day, and then boom, your whole action is kind of screwed because they knew everything, right? So I think that's just another thing I want to throw in there is be intentional about meetings and how each meeting is kind of this space to bring people in and escalate leaders. Next slide, please. Physical safety is something that is a complex issue, right? As we've been seeing lately, conflicts with the police are an inherent part of our struggles, right? And people getting hurt is evil and a crime and horrible, but also something that we are, is an inherent part of the struggle that we're in, particularly now, is all I'm saying. So marshal teams are another absolutely perfect way to get people to buy in and make sure that you're going to have like good turnout for your action. We've done marshal trainings like on Zoom, like a week before the action. I've also recently at a CPAC rally that I helped organize, we did the marshal training right like an hour before the action. So the marshals just had to come a little bit early. And these are the questions you have to be asking, right? When is that training going to be? Who's going to run it? Okay. Keeping in mind, again, there's no expert out there. There's no credentials that you should be looking for, but this is a person who you really need to trust, right? And they are going to be building trust with the marshals, which gives the rest of the participants, they're trusting the marshals. So I do think this is a crucial person, and you should put thought into their level of experience and their confidence in it. Do a location scout. You can do that on Google Earth. You can also, take a drive over, take a bike ride over, snap a couple pictures, send it to the people who are thinking about participating in the action. Another way to just manifest it, make it real, and make it less of just like, oh, we're having a protest. How many marshals need to be there? How many need to be trained? This is something that is, there are kind of rules of thumb about it based on your numbers. Like if you think it's going to be a big protest, 500 people, I would say like you definitely need like at least 20 marshals for something like that. But it's also something that you shouldn't get. I do see sometimes overthinking in action plannings where people kind of are all like looking at each other like, what's the right number? Like fearful that, if you get this wrong, people will get hurt, which makes sense. But trust, I think, your instincts and trust like group consensus that you can build towards of what will feel safe, right? And then I'm going to skip one over to the NLG or another legal aid organization. The National Lawyers Guild is basically a volunteer corps. I hope I'm just describing it correctly, and anybody can correct me in the chat if this is wrong, but it's essentially a volunteer corps of people who have undergone some kind of training for observing actions, right? Because we know with the police that simply having an official observer with, in this case, the NLG has these like neon yellow hats, is a great way to make the police aware that they're being watched and there are people with some kind of, legal expertise, at least in the mind of the police, watching them. And those, every time I've reached out to the NLG, they've always come through. People could pop other, maybe names of other groups in as well. And then I'll go back to the arrest thing, which is, that's a big decision, right? If you're going to have people be arrested, and I think you absolutely have to have at least one civil disobedience training before you do something like that. Something that I've learned through experience is also to have, if you want somebody to be arrested, if you have somebody there to be arrested to either hold a space longer, to dramatize what you're doing, have a plan B in case the cops are super chill that day. If the cops just are like, we don't care, you can hold the street for as long as you want, maybe that's great, and you're like, good, we don't want anybody to be arrested. But if you did want to escalate things for a strategic purpose, have a plan B for if the police are not. For example, if you're outside of a legislator's office and they let you hold the street, and maybe your plan B, if you wanted to escalate, could be to try to enter the office, right? And try to hold the space that does seem like something the police are going to arrest you for. And then stationary or mobile medics, you want to have a couple people with, preferably CPR training, but most importantly, just the intent and role of looking out for people's health and safety as they move through the crowd. Next slide. Comms is like more important than ever now, right? Because the way that many people experience actions is from reading about it before or during or after. But now since we can't have like in-person meetings, like digital organizing, as we call it, is a big part of what makes an action like successful. So how is it being advertised to potential attendees? Again, you want to be sending the right message of what the drama, whatever drama you're trying to create during the action is the drama you should be projecting before the action. And I'll throw in there too that another big thing is if you're planning civil disobedience, you're planning something that may break the law. Again, make a decision together collectively about to what degree you're going to reveal that before, right? In this lift the ban action, there was a ton of debate over like, do we tell people we're going to take the street? Do we tell people that we're going to put furnish in the street? And, everyone's nervous, everyone wants it to go well. And, that's great. But just again, keep in mind, follow your instincts. Don't be paralyzed by kind of fear that, I've also, in my experience, every time we've been afraid of the police knowing about an action, we have super publicized it as much as possible, sent out press releases, been afraid reporters would tip off the police, and then we get there and the cops are like, huh? Like, what's going on? Every single time. So I know that's not always the case, of course, especially as we've seen recently, but just don't assume, I think, that the police are like watching, the Democratized ComEd Facebook page, for example. So last few things here. You need somebody to write a press release. You need to send it out. There are great resources for activists for how to write a good press release and lists of reporters to send it to. Good due diligence on that is generally going to be like sending it out 2 weeks out, maybe again 1 week out, and then again like the day of the action. That's like the optimal way to do that. If you have an event page, make it more interactive and make it more engaging than just, oh, somebody can click interested, right? Have in the description of your like event page on Facebook or whatever, a sign up form for people to marshal, for example. Make it something that is like a little more meat on the bones than just like, a Mark Zuckerberg sponsored event page. And then we'll get more into security stuff later in this question of do marshals all have access to a secure communications channel? Oh, wait, no, we'll get into it right now. Next slide, please. So this is a super thoughtful, like what we're calling security triage, aka like identifying these different levels of security for the participants, right? So level one, as we've identified here, is like talking on Slack about it. You're on the phone, you're texting. These are things that you should assume if you're using those channels written here on level one, assume that like the police are seeing it, right? Or that God knows who is seeing it, okay? Level two would be things like email, Facebook Messenger, a private Slack group, things that are, again, you shouldn't assume that those are encrypted. You should assume people can see them, but are more like logistical planning where you just don't want your entire audience, any public person, to see it, right? Level 3 is Signal, right? Signal is the standard like encrypted messaging service. If anybody here doesn't know about Signal, it's free. You download it, you can start a group thread there to start planning things. It's basically a must if you're going to do anything that is illegal, even if you're just talking about it. Signal is where you're going to plan and probably communicate during the event, especially, right? And that's also where it's also about leaving a paper trail too, right? It's not just about whether somebody will know about it before and potentially divert or disrupt your action. It's also about if there are issues with the police, like whether afterwards there's a paper trail. And then last, level 4, like ultimately that's the most trustworthy thing, right? Is like seeing somebody in person, exchanging information there. Cool. And then, yeah, that's the last thing, is that like the reason we have that at the highest levels, because like you're never totally safe as long as we're like talking to each other on, these. All right. So again, I referenced before like schedules on Excel spreadsheets that exist, and again, your schedule on there is a crucial document of this, right? Any action that I do will have the spreadsheet, and I'll always print off the spreadsheet and bring it on a clipboard to the action, so you just have like a super handy physical place to just look at and like cross things off as you go along. We generally time it out to the minute during an action of exactly when each person is going to speak. You want your speakers to be another invitation to coalition building. It's great to have elected officials if that serves your political purposes. They can lend legitimacy, they can bring newsworthiness, but for the people who are there, the most powerful thing is always going to be the people who are most affected by the issue that you're bringing up, right? And then, of course, bringing in a coalition partner who you haven't had there is another thing. Working Family Solidarity has a speaker at this Lift the Ban action. We haven't seen them in months, so that's like a great way to invite people in, and to keep in mind that as organizers, an action is a social space where we can make connections to people, right? An action is a place where we can learn who maybe a coalition ally is that we didn't know as well before. If you're marching, people generally like draw up a route and again have a plan B in case the police block you at some place. And you can physically have that, again, using Google Maps or whatever. And then announcements about marshals, medics, future actions. Like I said, it is an organizing space in action, right? It's not just a political product. So at the end of that action, hopefully if you are able to have the presence of mind, or even better, assign somebody the role of kind of being the on-site organizer or welcomer or debriefer. They're there to make sure that everyone who's there escalates their involvement in whatever your campaign is. Cool. So Courtney, is this a spot that you want to pause? Great.
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah, so I'm just gonna, we just threw a lot of information at you. And hopefully in this time, you've been able to kind of think about like things, campaigns or issues that you're involved with, and ways that you might imagine a direct action that you might like to plan. So I'm going to go ahead and put a question in the chat, which is just for your dream action, what is your demand? What's your target? What degree of escalation would you use, and what type of action? And if you want to go ahead and talk about something that you're involved in, something that you might imagine doing, and discuss it with the group, you can go ahead and put yourself on Stack. Just type Stack into chat, and we can kind of share a little bit about things that we're all involved in and ways that we might think about applying this. I did want to add really quick that I think a lot of the stuff that we're thinking about fits into these kinds of like 3 like either demand, target, or escalation, that like physical safety, like communications, all that sort of stuff, like really depends based on your amount of escalation and like how you're leveraging your targets and what your demand actually is. So just like Brian mentioned, being like creative about how all of these things are intertwined is really kind of how they can be effective. One, like, just for my like dream action, which isn't a dream, but an action that actually happened lately that I was like, I love everything about this, just to like get the ball rolling, was Black Abolitionist Network put together a birthday party for Lori Lightfoot. That like the full day they had a digital campaign where it was like broken down hour by hour, different things that people could specifically mention to her about the way she's spending money on the police and like the way she hasn't followed through with campaign promises, and like a specific subsection of like a memorial for people who've been victims of police violence. And then they like went to her house and were like, happy fucking birthday, Lori, and had a dance party in the street, like taunting her. And I just feel like that's like such a really useful, dramatic combination of creative tactics that are like obviously dealing with COVID, but also like leveraging things like joy and like the levity of her birthday being like not particularly important to anyone else. But boy, does it suck for Lori Lightfoot that she can't have a good birthday because she's such a fucking bad mayor. So just like that was one thing that I thought that I could put out there to get the ball rolling. But I'd really love to hear from folks on this call what they're involved in already, or campaigns that they're excited about getting involved in if they're not already, and ways you could imagine kind of putting this to use for any kind of direct action, if anyone's interested in. I know it's kind of tough on a call where we haven't really introduced ourselves or, you know, set the community groundwork, but
yeah, and I'll just kind of encourage people by saying, you know, a half-formed idea is totally cool. Like if you're on a campaign or a campaign that you look at and all you have in your head is a target, you know, and you're like, I don't know how would I actually do this. That's a great place to start a discussion. And then I'll also just throw out there that like, there's so many things like the happy birthday one that like, you know, if you're nervous about proposing an idea or it seems like stupid to you, I mean, like that's a perfect example. Like that kind of sounds stupid if you like just proposed it and it hadn't happened. Like we're gonna have a birthday party for the bad mayor, and then if you like, then you do it and it's like hilarious and awesome. So looks like a couple people are in Stack now.
Yeah, really quick, I'll read the comments that are being put in the chat and then I'll call on the folks on Stack. So I see Jordan says, I'm really motivated to get HEROES Act pushed through, not really sure where to target yet. I feel like that's necessary information to start thinking about what actions to choose. That's totally right. Like what target seems like the first place to start. If you do want to hop on Stack, I'd love to hear more about HEROES Act and like how you're thinking about targets, because I think that that's really key. And then I see Julia's comment, I want to shake up JB and make him hear what we're saying. Bird dogging seems like it might work. Totally agree with you there, Julia. Although who fucking knows where he is? He's got so many houses and shit. Okay, Mary, I see you on Stack, and then Steve will go to you next.
Am I unmuted? It wouldn't let me do it.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So I don't know if this is like a perfect direct action, but so the post office is in trouble and I have this dream of creating like a postcard campaign where like we get lots of people to mail into their representatives to like repeal that act that Bush passed in the early 2000s, and to like federally fund the post office because they're a public service, they're not a business, and like that, yeah. And the HEROES Act is kind of part of it, but that's like, I don't know, that's not a perfect direct action because you like do it from your house and you're not like in the streets, but that's like my dream. I think about that every day.
I love that, Mary. And like, no, that totally is a direct action, especially in our current situation. Like we're all strategizing about how to do things safely. So right in line with that. Yeah, to Jordan's point, Stack is just how we make sure who wants to talk. So if you just type stack in the chat, we'll like keep track of folks in order. But happy to jump to you, Jordan, if you want to talk right now about your thoughts since you were kind of first originally.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, I'm still kind of getting used to the format of everything. But yeah, I think, well, the HEROES Act is one of the acts that's up there about getting a second stimulus check out there. It also includes for USPS and a few other really important measures to help kind of like the working class folk survive COVID and the other financial pressures that are happening. And it's different than, I think the other one's called like the HEALS Act that actually slices some protections. While it's supposed to help some people, it's actually slicing other ones. But it passed House and needs to just go through Senate now.
Gotcha. So yeah, so Senate's the target. How do we get folks connected, targeting their senators, but also maybe how do we get folks educated so that we can get groups of people communicating to their senators that that's what they're on board with. I think I see Steve next on Stack, and then Peter.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
How you guys doing? So yeah, my action that I'm thinking of, for about like 18 months now, I've been trying to start a union at work. Very, very slow. And I would really like to pick one thing happening at work that irritates people and ask them to organize around it and join me in an action. But unlike what a lot of Brian's been talking about, it's not necessarily like public facing. We're working from home. We wouldn't be doing anything in public, but the action I was picturing was basically having everybody who would join us send an email to the whole group of editors, since I'm an editor, the whole group, and sort of publicly declare that they're not doing a certain project that we've been working on. So there's a lot that I still need to work out that Brian raised over the slideshow, because truthfully, the things that people are upset about are aimed way above our supervisors. Our supervisors don't determine a lot of the stuff that bothers people, but then it's hard to figure out who does in the corporate structure, and hard to pick out like the right person to target and get everybody mad at that person and agitate around that. And it's a lot easier for me and my coworkers to be irritated at each other or the supervisors directly above us who don't make the decisions but communicate them to us. So that's been one of the struggles that I've had, that we've all had.
Totally. It's like, I'm really glad you brought up this example, because I do think, yeah, most of what we've been discussing, it's kind of like these bigger public facing like figures of power, representatives, but all these same issues apply to labor organizing. And it's all the more difficult to figure out how to strategically inside create pressure, although sometimes outward pressure can help with inward pressure. But all to say, we also do, DSA has an emergency worker organizing committee that has been working with unions to or like especially establishing unions in this current moment, that I really want to plug here, that we'll make sure to include the link in the follow-up email. But make sure that you've signed in so you can get that email, and then we'll really get in connection with that, because it's great to hear that that's going on, but obviously you need support to do that kind of work. And
Courtney, if I could throw one other quick response to Steve too, which is like, I mean, I don't know enough about labor organizing, like to be honest, like it's much riskier, right, than just like going to yell at a politician. But I do think it's interesting what you bring up about like kind of it's not public facing, which is interesting because like you could think of like the other workers that you kind of aren't on board with you yet as your audience for it, right? And then of course, if you're an editor and that's a public facing publication, then there's an audience there too. So yeah, like that's a great thing to bring up, is just that like you may be trying to pressure management or a politician, but like ultimately, like you're trying to motivate people who aren't that person as well. So.
Totally. So I see we've got one more person left on stack, Peter, and then after that, we'll make sure to move on so we can have time for Q&A at the end where we can keep talking about this stuff for sure. So, and yeah, I will also share the sign-in link as in just a second. You can go ahead, Peter.
Okay, so I'm Peter, he, him. I'm a part of an IPO in Edgewater, the 48th Ward Neighbors for Justice. I just joined like a housing committee that just got started. And I've been thinking a lot about possible actions because our Alderman Harry Osterman is the chair of the housing committee. One thing that I was thinking about was maybe like trying to draw attention to like just cause evictions by trying to basically like create a tent city in front of his office, like getting hundreds of people to set up tents and maybe having like an overnight sleepover on Broadway. Something like that. I don't know if that would be clear enough for the message, but I think it would be kind of a cool visual. So, yeah.
Brian, do you want to say anything about that? Since I know.
Well, Peter and I share that Alderman, and I mean, it is a great idea. It's definitely been done like a couple times, which is a good thing. Like, you know, that it kind of can bring attention, and I think it's at least a great start of an idea for sure. I know he lives in like pretty bougie street from what I remember too, so that created an interesting tension, I think, with some of those people. But I certainly think you're onto something.
Okay, great. I really appreciate everyone sharing their like interests. It's always just so much more enriching to hear from you all also that like Brian has said, we're not experts by any means, and like we're all learning how to organize forever together. So really excited to hear more people's thoughts during the Q&A as well. But I'll toss it back to you, Brian, to finish up the like during and after sections.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing, you guys. And during the action, if we want to go on to the next slide, of course, the Marshals communication is maybe the most like crucial thing, I think, since the Marshals really are like your kind of safety net. They should probably have multiple signal channels set up, right? Like maybe one for the like key lead marshals who are kind of making decisions, and then another for all the rest of your, you know, however many marshals you have. What are they communicating about, right? That'll be up to the lead marshal to set those standards and guidelines. But like for example, at a recent CPAC rally that we did, the marshals we were marching down Broadway, so the marshals were communicating about like each intersection, right? And they were strictly told like, you know, like this channel is for like if you run into an issue with the police. My point being, you know, like what kind of chatter is going to disrupt or interrupt good conversation is an important thing to think about, right? Under what conditions? Oh, and the other thing I'll throw in there too is if you do have some kind of car caravan component, that is another like communication channel that you have to think about, right? Under what conditions will the action be called off? We did a sit-in once in Pritzker's office on rent control, where our condition was to get a meeting with the governor, which I think we like did the sit-in lasted until basically like their workday was over, and they were just like, what are we gonna do with these freaks who are taking our office? Like we can't leave them here. So that ended up being the moment where like the real decision, they were really forced into that decision, and they like agreed to have a meeting with us and like his lieutenant governor, I think. And so we like accepted that as like getting what we wanted out of it, which yeah, like in hindsight, like there's so much going on. There's so many logistics. There's so many things you have to do. And it's easy to lose sight of the big picture of what you really want. If you're trying to force them into a decision that they have to make on the spot, if you're like, we're not leaving until we get this or something like that, really like take a deep breath with your team, with your organizers, and ask yourselves, like, with all the work that we're going to put into this, is this outcome like something we really want? Like I've had actions where we were ready to get arrested. We threw down, we like drove all the way to Springfield, and then like we got what we wanted. It was like a meeting. And then like later I was like, what the hell do we want to meet with them for? Like, they don't, we want to like push them. We don't want to meet with them and have them just, blow smoke in our faces. So, you live and learn. It's not like, we were stupid or anything, but I just think there's always so much happening. It's important to try to have presence of mind and think like, how will I feel after this action if we get X, Y, or Z? Under what conditions will the action be called off? So that's one example, is you get what you want. Weather is, of course, always the scariest thing, right? I think that is a thing that too much fear comes into you. You want the action to go really well, and you hear it might rain that day, and you go, that's going to cut turnout in half, like just make a rational like decision. Just go like, all right, fine, we'll have some fewer people, but we'll look badass because we're in the rain. Like that'll scare the politician as well, right? Don't, always choose from your nervousness, I think. And nerves are a big part of planning these things, right? And then of course have like a protester safety red line of just like, if the cops reach this level of retaliation, or if, cars, like whatever it is, like we're done, we're gonna go home. And going home, well, I guess I'll bring up going home here too, especially now with heightened tensions with the police. Like going home is one of the most important parts, and has left a big impression on people participating in a lot of these marches. If they go home with an escort, or at least if just the organizers are super loud and clear at the end of the rally, whatever, that like, do not go home alone, folks. And if you see, like a person who is there alone, and, hang out and wait until like you're absolutely sure that they either have an escort home or something like that. That's become increasingly like a hallmark of a lot of, especially the police associated actions. How are the organizers communicating to protest attendees? Generally, you're going to want like one mic, right? And like you let your lead marshal use it if there are like marshal announcements. And you should have an MC. You absolutely have to have somebody who's like, they're not there to make speeches. They're just literally there to like watch the schedule and make sure things are running on time, and communicate things like that. And lastly, is someone recording or live streaming the speakers? Always a good idea. To have somebody whose job it is to just like literally hold up their phone, somebody who you trust to show up with their phone charged, and live stream it to maybe CDSA's page in this case. All right, next slide. Courtney, do you want to pause there? Do you want to ask a question there? Or I don't
Just
know if
for the sake of time, we can do it really quick before the question and answer.
Great. Okay, cool. So what to do after the action? You should probably have a meeting with those organizers, right? Or at the very least, an email thread. If you want to keep it simple, you can do, what they call a SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Sort of just quick little analysis, like, hey, everybody, like you participated in this. And it's, again, crucial, I think, as organizers to not just let people feel like they kind of consumed a political product. Like I went to the march and I marched. What about, what did you notice we could have done better? Like, who did we leave out coalition wise? And it's really important to do that in like a constructive and like affirming way, right? Like, because people put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into an action. And if things do go wrong, it's just important to be careful about people's feelings and like be very tactful in how we bring up improvements, so that like certain people don't end up feeling, crushed under the weight of things that could have been better. Of course, have a check-in to make sure everybody's okay. Jail support, you gotta have people who are if you think anyone's going to get arrested, you got to have people who are planning on hanging out outside of jail all night if necessary, people who have contact with the loved ones or partners or roommates of the people who may be in jail. That's something that you just got to plan ahead as much as any other element, right? Cannot be an afterthought. What media follow-up is needed? I should have mentioned earlier that like during an action, another good thing is to have somebody with a press packet, which could be a really short, simple little thing. And usually like reporters are of varying degrees of how much they give a shit. Like I found a lot of times like cameramen who are just there to get coverage, like great guys, you know, they're working super hard, but they're working so hard. They don't have, you know, they're not there to like read all the statistics on homelessness in that district and stuff like that. Nevertheless, good to throw a press packet out there and try to shape the narrative like within their newsroom a bit. And media follow-up means, you know, just sending out the same to the same list that you sent your press release, send a press follow-up, right? That just says like, our action worked, and if you can be creative and come up with some angle of like why this matters and not just like we did what we said we were going to do, that's good. And then lastly, what's the escalation, right? You want to avoid burnout. You don't want, if you're going to end up doing actions like monthly or even more frequently than that, rotate who is doing those. Otherwise, people are going to end up extremely burnt out. But also don't let too much time pass. If you're trying to keep up pressure on a legislator, for example, to go back to our example, we did like that hardcore furniture in the street protest, you know, with news cameras there of this state legislator, Ann Williams. And we did feel too kind of burnt out from it to like immediately plan another one. But what we did see was she had a town hall in a couple weeks. So we sent, you know, 10, 15 people to that town hall. Every single one of them just asked her about Lift the Ban. And the next day we heard from her office, she was like, leave me the fuck alone. I'm going to vote yes on this. Please stop. So the follow-up politically, strategically is really important. And you're going to feel good after your action. And tired, which are both reasons to like not immediately plan another. So look for, you know, escalations that aren't necessarily escalations, if you know what I mean, like showing up at a town hall, like following up with a phone zap, you know, just like make sure that the politician feels like, oh my God, is this never going to end? Or management or the landlord or whoever your target is. Next slide. Cool, questions? And or Courtney, if you want to do another kind of reflection here, whatever.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do think, so we've got about 20, oh wait, was it over at 4? I'm not sure what the time it was supposed to end. But in any case, I think we could do both at the same time, that if folks have questions, it's also still helpful, I think, to think through what we had gotten, 4, great, perfect. Started talking about with people's specific ideas. And I see what Julia mentioned in the chat about tent cities and like whether or not we can escalate that idea. Like, I think there's a lot of fruitful room for us to talk amongst one another about how to make these ideas real. And so I think we can just open stack for any questions or comments, or like, if you haven't mentioned your issue or campaign yet, feel free to introduce yourself and what you are hoping to apply this direct action to. I see Steve again. Go ahead. Oh, I think you're muted.
There I am. Sorry, I don't want to dominate. I don't want to take up too much time, but I have a question about allies and how to navigate the question of the level of escalation when you know you have different opinions among your allies about what's an appropriate action to take next. Somebody says you're too extreme, etc.
I can kind of take this a little bit because I've experienced this a lot. a lot of it is literally just going with your gut frequently and talking it out with people that you trust that are comrades that are on the same page as you for the most part, to see how you want to weigh out things. And like maybe something is an action through a coalition. The coalition doesn't want to move forward with something, but like your fellow members in DSA, for example, do want to move forward with something, and like we find a way to talk to coalition members about, we're going to move forward with this anyway. Or maybe the coalition wants to move forward with something and like allies of the coalition don't want them to, and like weighing out like, is there a way to talk to them about us escalating in a way that isn't going to alienate them, or is going to be like, hey, we're going to do this, but we're going to keep working together in the future. Like, sorry if you disagree, but like we'll make it clear that it's not you doing this, it's us. And just kind of weighing out at each individual time. And I know that's like a bad answer and that it's not a clear answer, but like really that's the best way to feel it out. Anytime that happens, I end up having like group calls with like everyone I know involved, and then like individual one-on-one calls with people like for a couple hours afterwards. And that's the best way, I think, to make that decision.
So I see a question in the chat from Rory. Do you have any other examples of, quote, escalations that aren't escalations, or things that extend a target's awareness of the action that keep pushing them towards signing on without creating a ton of burnout for coalition members?
Courtney, do you feel like you have a response to that? I have a couple ideas.
Go ahead.
So yeah, like phone zap is kind of the like most basic, simple thing, right? If you had 50 people at your action, hopefully you'll be able to generate like 25 to 100 phone calls in their office over the following couple days. Phone zaps are pretty easy to organize as long as you have like pretty engaged members. Again, it's the kind of thing that you can just ask, like look for a CDSA leader and ask, and people can hook you up with a phone zap just template that you can just fill in, you know. So that's one thing. Another one would be just thinking about what can a smaller group of people accomplish, right? Like if you had a big protest or like a big die-in, like could you do something that's more like shift based, you know, where you just have like one person standing silently outside their office with a sign about the issue, and you kind of take shifts so that each person is just throwing in a couple sort of passive hours. Another option, like I said, would be just like look for their next event that they're having and just show up to it. So you don't have to organize the logistics of something. You just show up to a town hall, you know, say your piece, and then go like, you know, have a beer or coffee after. Those are the things that come to mind off the top of my head.
I have a couple things that I'll throw out.
Sorry, Sarah, but like,
yeah.
Sometimes you've done 5 actions on somebody and you're like, they're just so stubborn. Like that's an important not follow up.
Yeah, I mean, knowing when to give up, but also like knowing when to reassess, I think is important, and reassess like if there's a different pressure point on the person that you're trying to pressure. But another one I would say is like building your escalation into your action itself in a way that you aren't responsible for bottom lining it. So like you have an action and you meet people there and you have pre-planned, like we're going to have everyone send an email after this, or everyone write a postcard like at this event and we'll mail them later, and like assign out like in advance, be like, okay, we're going to find somebody at this action who's going to like bottom line doing this that's not me. And just like plan that into your action planning in whatever way makes sense.
The one other thing that like, again, I don't know if I've emphasized this enough, but I'm like I have not personally planned direct actions yet, but I think that there is a lot to say about direct actions that have been going on that require a lot of legwork that are not accomplishing their ends simply because like marches are being allowed and the like pressure implied being built up on them are not necessarily being targeted. And so I do think that there's a lot to say for these like more personal, like thinking about the motivations of the individuals who we're hoping to target, and like being really strategic about like the escalation, like Sarah mentioned, of the actual event, rather than like what we know to be like a good picture of an accomplished march or something like that, that like ultimately is not really making waves in the media or whatever in the same way that it once was. So.
Hell yeah, that's such a good point. Like, we did a big march against our alderman here on CPAC, and the point of a big march is like a lot of different things, but like one of it is like, look how many of your voters, you know, are mad at you, right? Like, think of it the way they would think of it, right? And so after that, like, what's the point of doing another giant march, right? You're gonna have less people the second time probably. So yeah, the next thing is to start to test other things besides like, yeah, look how many people came.
I see Peter says, I'd be curious in hearing some thoughts on ways to escalate the idea of a tent city to further agitate / draw attention. I mean, one short thing that I can say is like not putting them places where they're out of the way. Like, I think having them in like right in front of City Hall, like people are not going there right now anyway. But just thinking about like things that are common escalations in general, like, are you blocking traffic? Are you like creating an actual problem for anyone? Then again, obviously it's an escalation and there are more consequences for that. But yeah, I'm curious if other people have thoughts about this, because I do think that that's
I have some. This has been an ongoing question that I've been talking to people like Brian and other people about a lot lately, I feel like. But there's a like push and pull right now with the pandemic in terms of like how people are escalating. And so like, especially in-person escalations, like the risk of getting arrested means putting yourself at further risk for coronavirus. And so like really thinking through, like, do we want to create a space where like we are putting ourselves in jail for like this action, and like what, like, because like honestly getting arrested is like a big escalation, and like planning arrests is a big escalation. And that's one way we would typically do like in a situation like a tent city. And like anything that we would do around the escalations, like having it in somebody's yard or blocking traffic does risk arrest. And so like at what point are we balancing that? And I mean, there are lots of ways to like further agitate around that. Like, I think right now we're exploring stuff with bird dogging and stuff like that. And like, I think there might be a creative way to like pull the string of like, this is the continuation of a tent city. Yeah.
I am glad you brought up the like COVID related like it is even more of a risk to be arrested right now, especially also I keep thinking of the organizer in Utah who's facing a felony charge for buying the paint that was used to damage like building or something. They just like put paint on it. So yeah, I do think that arrest is like a very frightening thing right now, more than the typical like you're in jail overnight one night and it's like not a big deal. That a lot of the escalation stuff happens. But to the point that's in the chat right now, one action I haven't heard of today is boycotting. Is this intentional? What things might a person want to consider before organizing boycotts? I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that. But the other thing I was going to mention that like obviously I don't think CDSA uses as a tactic really ever, but that like some folks might say to escalate is like property damage. Like, you know, I don't know the extent to which we want to like I don't think we're suggesting anyone ought to do any of those things, but that is like the next step of escalation for a lot of folks, and that might not always be like the coordinated activities of leadership of an action, but is also sort of a thing that you might want to think through folks who might be attending might also do and consider that. Thanks,
I'll
Larry.
throw out another thing on the boycott thing too, which I think, and Joe, feel free to speak on maybe who you're thinking about. But I think that if you're doing a boycott to damage a company's bottom line, like that seems to almost never work because like we're talking either if unless it's like a specific local business, and even that kind of makes the point I'm about to make, which is just like it's extremely difficult to actually change the like bottom line that consumers experience of a local business for so many reasons that are out of our control, right? But something that I think a boycott can be useful for is more of a public image thing, right? Like businesses like are afraid of like their brand being harmed, and so a boycott to me could be potentially a good way to like start that process. But I think that you have to again just be intentional. Like if you're going to ask people to engage and put energy into a consumer boycott, like ask yourself, like do the math and say like how many thousands of people do I have to get to stop buying this product before this company's actually going to be hurt by this, right? Just a math thing to me.
I'd agree with Brian. I'd also say like boycotts are harder to do frequently, in part because you don't know what resources people have that they can take like certain steps, and like I don't know, stuff with like purchasing gets weird because like alternatives to whatever you would be buying probably have a lot of the same problems of the reason why you're boycotting that one product in the first place. So it just like gets into a weird rabbit hole. So I've never personally organized a boycott. I know other people who have, and I've participated in boycotts before, but I just think they're tricky, trickier than other actions.
Okay, I see another question in the chat. It says, hopefully this question makes sense, but do you have specific examples of pressure points on your target that we've leveraged in the past? Or put another way, what motivations have you seen politicians / other targets have that we can potentially take advantage of? I've heard of a few related to politicians and public image, but I was just curious if you guys have other stories. Thanks. And that's Andrew.
I'd say a big one is usually donors. Donors to politicians. Right now we're doing some research around defunding the police in general, as the campaign is doing a lot of research right now. And like one of the things that we're researching is police associations. And like, for example, Exelon, the parent company of ComEd, donates a lot of money to police associations. So like going around with that. Somebody in the chat, said unions there, Brian said unions they're associated with. Like looking for where you might have potential allies that are a pressure point for a different institution or person. Like, for example, like if a university is doing something that people want to change as an institution, their workers are a pressure point, their students, the parents of their students, the donors to the endowment, like all of those are different pressure points. I see also Steve has an example for this.
Hi, yes, I do. Sorry, it's brief. Just this past month, I joined a short campaign to try to get my high school alma mater to change its mascot. They were the Warriors with like a native mascot. And it's also a Catholic high school, so we were listing out the pressure points that the principal of the school would be feeling when we tried to campaign him to change it. So alumni, teachers or faculty, current students, those would all be examples of pressure points where it's like current students being young people and in the generation that's like very politically active would probably care a lot about it. Alumni who have had 30 years to get used to the name Warriors and are older and grew up with it don't care as much. So we started to think about how those different groups would react to the idea of changing the mascot and which ones of those would in turn put more pressure on the people who could make the decision.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's if you want to like think more about this, this is like getting into a lot of how we do power mapping, which is a very important step for any campaign and an important step before you start doing actions, I think. I'll turn it back over to Courtney.
Oh, I was just going to put a link to the last power mapping training in the chat for folks who want to look at that. But then, yeah, I will pass it to Mary, who I see on staff.
So you guys talked a lot about like using civil disobedience as like a form of like escalation and like possibly getting arrested as a form of escalation. How, and I might not be asking this question right, but like how do you include all protest participants in like informed consent versus like trying to keep something like secret and private for like safety of people like perhaps taking a drastic measure to like escalate something to like raise pressure, and like where, like how do you guys like, and obviously like this question has no definitive answer, but I'm just looking for other people's like thoughts behind like juggling that ethics question of like, who do I tell what, when, and how do I protect the people that need the most protecting while still giving everybody like an opportunity to be informed and consent to like be there and part of the movement.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is like, you can never control like the actions of the police. So like we can never fully guarantee like full safety, and we can never guarantee that you aren't going to get arrested because we can't guarantee what the police are going to do. So like that's always something that exists. But in terms of like the civil disobedience stuff, usually how it works is a couple people in advance are like, okay, I'm going to participate in civil disobedience. And when it comes to the point where the police like say like everyone has to disperse or else you're going to get arrested or whatever, usually the rest of the organizers are like, okay, these are the people who are going to like stay, and these are the people who are going to participate in civil disobedience that we know in advance and that we've done civil disobedience training with in advance, and that we have like a list of information to provide jail support in advance. And we say like that's who is going to get arrested, and like everyone else can kind of like disperse out a bit, and like they're going to still stay there. That obviously like doesn't always work because we can't control what the police do. We can't control if they are going to go after people who are dispersing. We can't control if somebody decides that they aren't going to listen to the command to disperse. All we can really do is just say like, look, like these are the risks that exist with every protest. These are the exists that are happening as stuff is escalating, which is in part why it's important to have a good marshal team, because you can disperse out marshals throughout the protest and make sure that everyone has the information that organizers are getting, because you can just say, okay, like we're going to like pipeline this out to the marshals, and they're going to let people around them know like what's happening, and like as things develop, because things can escalate really quickly if you don't have people informed throughout the whole thing. Does that answer kind of? Also, I don't know if Brian has something else.
I have just one kind of answer that I hope doesn't sound like a deflection, but I do think that, you know, every decision, like I've been saying, is a creative one in these. It's not just really a science. I think it's like sort of an art. And I think that the questions you're bringing up are totally crucial to the process, and ones that you should just be doing everything you can to create like collective decision making around, right? Like there probably isn't a right answer when it comes to like different safety issues, but if as a coalition or as CDSA members you can have that discussion, I mean, it's beautiful, right? To have like people who are activists together like truly take their safety into their own hands collectively as much as possible. So I know that's kind of not like an answer, but kind of to me, that's like always part of the process. And like it's our responsibility to make sure that the most vulnerable people in the room have the say, or at least a say in those decisions. The biggest thing that I remember was like right the first weekend of the George Floyd protests, there was an action that was supposed to happen, and the DSA people were like, dude, we're not doing an action. Are you kidding me? Like everything's on fire. Like the Walgreens is, it was that super first crazy chaotic moment. And so there was like a really tough like discussion of whether to move forward with it or not. And like it was just interesting because like a lot of the South Side like groups with more Black members were like, no, we should still do this, and like more of the white North Side groups were like, no, we shouldn't. So there's like always new political tensions to deal with in anything like that, and ultimately it's about like everyone feeling democratic when they come out of it, I think.
I would also throw in there, because you're talking about a different protest than the one that I am actually thinking of when you first started this sentence, Brian. I was thinking of the one that was being planned by some people in my neighborhood that a bunch of organizers were like, we cannot move forward with this at all. I wasn't even thinking of what you were thinking of. But
that was like a counter protest, right? Or kind of?
The Proud Boys?
Sort of. I don't fully understand still like what exactly was going on with that. But basically, what it came down to is like people who were trying to organize it reached out to like me and like a bunch of other people who live in the neighborhood and the organizers and like the surrounding neighborhoods about it. And like there was just like a series of communication back and forth where like we finally all came to the same conclusion that like this could not move forward. And like there are other steps to move forward that weren't that rally for people's safety, because the issue was safety.
This is like an uninformed thought because I was not present at this protest, and like I am totally unclear about how CDSA was involved with it, but I do know that the like protest where the Columbus statue is attempted to take down, even like marshals were not informed about the level of escalation that was going on. And so I'm like really glad you asked this question, Mary. I think it's really important, but I also think it's like part of the nature of the beast that it's like hard to say what to do. And like in like that level of escalation, it's like unclear what best practices could be for that situation. I think from my perspective about like how that information could have gotten out if it had been shared with that level of and ultimately, like, I think they did try and get folks out if they weren't comfortable being there after the fact. But like, I think that it's a really good question for all of us to have in mind going forward for sure, as we plan more and more escalations in these situations where also, like Sarah said, like police are unpredictable and it's like really impossible to know what day they're going to just be fucking pricks and what days they won't arrest you even when you want to be.
So we have 3 minutes left here. I just want to thank everybody for listening. A lot of talking here. The one little sort of concrete thing, and I'll just say generally, like I'm on Slack. You know, Brian Bennett. I don't know. I don't want to speak for Courtney or Sarah too, but like, if you're chewing on this and you think more about ideas that you might want to go with, DM me and I would absolutely love to talk about it. And I'll just throw out there too that we're having, if you like aren't involved in anything right now, we are doing a pretty intense occupation action for housing justice stuff in a couple weeks. So we're having a planning meeting for that this Tuesday. So that would be a good place to kind of start to get your hands dirty based on all of this. And I just dropped the Zoom link for that in the chat. I don't have like a event page, but copy that now if you want to be there, or DM me in Slack because it'll disappear as soon as the meeting ends. And if you can't be at the planning meeting, but you want to go, I have a Google form as well. Sarah, what's up?
I can also include all of this in the email that I'm going to be sending out. Probably not today because I want to log off because I had too many Zoom meetings today. But I will send that email tomorrow to everyone who signed in at that bit.ly link, bit.ly/8820 action planning. A and P are both capitalized.
And also just one last thing you can do, since the email won't go out today, is there is a CPAC protest tomorrow in Lincoln Park that's starting in 2 different locations. I'm putting the Facebook link in the chat now, just for another direct action in case you are interested.
Unless folks have any other questions, we can get going then.
Rad. See
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.